afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and my distinguished listeners. You are welcome to the first episode of Law and Politics with Barrister Abdurrahman. In this weekly series, we shall be discussing issues around law and politics in Nigeria, how it affects our lives as Nigerians, and what the law says about political events that happen and policies that government desires to undertake in pursuit of its mandate to the people. Today, we shall be, from now till the end of the electoral season, we shall be talking about elections and electoral system in Nigeria. We shall be having a review of the Electoral Act and other legislation that make up the legal regime that governs and regulates electoral conduct in Nigeria. For today's episode, we shall be discussing the history of elections in Nigeria and the legal regime that governs the conduct of elections. Nigeria's history of elections dates back to the colonial era, when the colonial masters granted some selected citizens the right to vote at elections. Of course, it was a restricted right. Not all Nigerians were entitled to vote then, giving you a sense of the limitation that colonial rule always imposed on the subject. Coming down the line towards independence, when Nigeria was about to be given independence, we got a lot of the colonial masters decided to grant Nigerians the full right to participate in election, to vie for political offices, and also the right to Nigerians to vote. It was in that period that the elections that was held then in the 1958 and 59 produced the then first Prime Minister of Nigeria, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and subsequently the elections afterward. Subsequently, there were elections in 1963 and elections also in 1978 that ushered in the Shagari administration, and then there were elections in 1984 then, that before the coup of General Muhammadu Buhari. Those three elections ushered in the first, second, and third republic. It was after those elections then we now had the fourth election in 1999 that brought in the administration of President Olusegun Obasanjo, bringing in the fourth republic. From that period till now, we've had elections in 2003, 2007, 2011, 2015, and 2019 respectively. As we speak and stand now, Nigeria is in the 9th republic, and here we are in the season of elections in 2023. In the coming weeks or in a month's time, Nigerians again will be going to the polls to elect the president, members, House of Representatives and Senate, their governors and members of State Assembly. So, having talked about this, what does the law say? How does the law govern elections in Nigeria? The legal regime that governs elections in Nigeria revolves around the 1999 Nigerian Constitution. There is the Electoral Act, which has been amended over time, almost 3 times. And then there is, of course, the guidelines issued by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. And there are other legislation that do not really touch on the conduct of elections, but however, do have a bearing on elections. When elections have been conducted and concluded, and parties or candidates at an election are not happy with the outcome, and they try to dischallenge the outcome of the election in court, there are practice directions and rules of court that guide proceedings to challenge electoral dispute. Now, back to elections. In Nigeria, there are 3 phases of elections. There is the pre-elections phase, there is the election phase, and then there is the post-election phase. The pre-election phase covers the areas of voter sensitization, voter registration by INEC, the nomination of candidates by political parties, primary elections, and submission of forms and names of candidates by political parties to the Independent National Electoral Commission. And then the election stage is the stage at which Nigerian citizens go to the polls to cast their vote to select their leaders. And it also involves, setting the stage and the polling units. It also involves mobilization of resources by INEC. It involves monitoring of election by non-governmental organization. Then there is the post-election stage. This majorly has to do with electoral dispute resolution, which I have mentioned earlier, where parties who are aggrieved by the outcome of election, who feel that the elections were not conducted properly in accordance with the law, have the right to approach tribunals that have been set up under the law to challenge the outcome of electoral disputes. We'll take a more extensive look at the provisions of the law in our subsequent episode. But for this episode, we shall be looking at what the Constitution says regarding election. First, we must understand that there is a body that conducts election and makes rules and regulations that guides election in Nigeria. That body is the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. INEC is established under Section 15 of the Part 1 of the 3rd Schedule to the 1999 Nigerian Constitution. It is led by a chairman and 12 commissioners appointed by the president. Across all states of the federation, there are resident electoral commissioners who oversee the conduct and supervise election. INEC has the powers to conduct elections, to regulate the affairs and activities of political parties, to register political parties, to conduct voter registration and sensitization. And it also has the powers to audit and control funds and accounts of political parties. INEC is the sole body that is vested with powers to conduct elections in Nigeria. And like I have stated, it is established under the Constitution. Aside INEC, the Constitution also provides that elections shall be held every 4 years. So that is why Nigeria always holds its election after every 4 years. This system is fashioned after the United States model of 4 years election. Aside holding 4 years election, Nigeria operates what we call a multi-party system, where different political parties are registered and are allowed to sponsor candidates to participate in an election. Under the Constitution, only a political party can sponsor a candidate to run for an election. So as an individual, if you want to participate at an election, you can only do so under the platform of a political party. You cannot just register, you cannot just put yourself off and begin to solicit votes to participate in an election. You have to do so under the platform of a political party. And to deepen the democratic processes, the Constitution has made ample provision to guide conduct of election, and in line with the principles of democracy, which is the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. All Nigerians, once they attain the age of majority, that is 18 years, are qualified to cast their vote in any election, and that is their own way of contributing or participating in the affairs of the government of the country. We have talked about certain aspects of the Constitution as it relates to election. Now, we will now look at the Electoral Acts that have been passed over time. The Electoral Act actually goes into details about the principles of law and the method through which elections are to be conducted. Right now, what we'll be doing is to just go through the various electoral acts that Nigeria has had. We will not be going into details, we'll only be taking time. We'll be doing that in our subsequent classes. So the first electoral act that was passed in Nigeria was that of 1999 rather. After the 1999 election, there was a review of the Electoral Act, and the Electoral Act of 2006 was passed. The act was passed in preparation for the 2007 general election. After the 2007 general election, there was also a review stated by the outcry and the controversy that trailed the conduct of the 2007 Electoral Act, which was generally adjudged to be unfair and highly uncredible. There were a lot of malpractices, vote buying, and voter intimidation. Even the candidate that succeeded at the election, late President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, discredited the whole system. And it was that bitter experience that forced the late president to establish a committee to review the Electoral Act. From that period till date, there have been successive amendments to the Act, and in our subsequent episodes, we shall be reviewing the provisions of the Electoral Act. Of course, earlier I have mentioned guidelines issued by INEC. These guidelines are issued by INEC to provide details as to how the whole electoral system should be conducted, starting from the sale of form by political parties. In fact, even before sale of form, there is the procedure. The guidelines spells out the mode through which political parties can apply to INEC to be registered, and then the procedure for sale of forms to candidates who wish to participate in the primaries of their political parties in preparation for participation at the general election. And from that step up to the level of primary elections, to the submission of the names by political parties of successful candidates at their primary election, up to the level of general election, the procedure for voting, from the screening of voters to the voting system, to how the ballots should be, to how voters should cast their vote in the ballot, to the counting of ballots, to the filling of the relevant INEC forms. This brings us to the end of this episode. In subsequent weeks, we shall be going into more details about the Electoral Act, and we shall have a review and further understanding of the system of elections in Nigeria. As this is the first episode of this series, our subsequent episode will feature a discussion in Hausa language of all that you've been saying. So we'll be alternating bi-weekly. If we hold a conversation or if you have a discussion on a particular topic in English in a week, the following week we will now have discussion in Hausa language for the benefit of Hausa audience. I would like to hear your feedback and comments, so please do take advantage of the comment section and leave your comments there. If you come back next week, we will take them and respond to any observation, criticism, or question that you might have. Pending that time, see you next week and goodbye.